That's right, this war is stupid, and we're going to reach 600 to 700,000 dead once again for nothing with abominable war crimes. And besides, what is the final result? It's that Putin appears as the leader of the global south. Do you think that's smart? And look at what is happening in Africa. Putin is taking our place with French in Africa. We used to say China Africa, now it's Russia Africa. And so we have managed to install Putin as the leader of the global south. That is 2/3 of the planet.
In the new year, Russian troops continued the offensive planned by the command at the end of 2024. On December 31st, the armed forces of the Russian Federation took control of the industrial zone of Kurakhove and continued to cover Ukrainian units that had retreated from this important city from the flanks. South of neighboring Pokrovsk, the Russian army found a weak spot in the enemy's defense. With large forces, they crossed the Salt River. The armed forces of Ukraine tried to build a line of defense on it. Finally, in the new year, a group of the armed forces of the Russian Federation came into the motion to the east of Pokrovsk, which should cover the city from the north. In addition, Russian troops have almost finished capturing a large agglomeration of Toretsk, north of Donetsk. In areas where other Russian groups operate, the offensive is more difficult. In the Kursk region, the battle is approaching its climax. In counter battles, both sides suffer losses. The armed forces of the Russian Federation, despite the constant counterattacks of the armed forces of Ukraine, managed to approach the key points of the Ukrainian defense, but they have not yet been able to deliver a decisive blow. Oleksiy Hetman, a reserve major of the National Guard of Ukraine and a veteran of the Russian-Ukrainian War, commented on the dire situation for the Ukrainian defenders in the Kurakhove sector. He noted that the current task of the defenders is not to recapture settlements on the Eastern Front, but at least to hold the defense. If retreating, it should be with battles to well-prepared positions. He discussed the situation in Kurakhove in an interview on Ukrainian TV. Then the head of the Reservists Council of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Mr. Ivan Timochko, made the following comments, also on the Kurakhove situation on Ukrainian TV. He claimed that the issue of Kurakhove remains unresolved and that even the Russian forces have not claimed the Russian army has captured the town. These statements were made as of January 11th. He did at least admit that the situation in the area is difficult and complex. Lastly, the manpower issue in the Ukrainian army is becoming so dire that the deputy of the Kharkiv City Council is now sounding the alarm on Ukrainian media. First, RIA Novosti media commented on the disturbing practice of the Ukrainian armed forces in the Kursk region, where they refuse to evacuate their dead. Second, on the 12th of January, Mr. Artem Revchuk described the situation for the Ukrainian army as extremely dangerous and demanded that serious conversations be made with the Ukrainian people. More on that later on in this video. So today's video will be an overview of the Kurakhove, Pokrovsk and Kursk sectors with a particular focus on what's occurring in Kurakhove, especially given that many of the Ukrainian officials and experts refuse to admit that the Russians have captured the town. We will also explore why that is so. Not a lot has changed in the past few days since my previous report on those areas. However, we have some recent assessments from Ukrainian and Russian sources. There is also a Polish article that comments on the Ukrainian command's refusal to acknowledge the defeat. There is also a report from Russian media, RIA Novosti, on the disturbing practices of the Ukrainian armed forces in Kursk. Now, many of you might remember that viral footage of the hand-to-hand combat scene between a Russian YAKUT fighter and a Ukrainian soldier in the Eastern Front. Well, it seems that that video, which was taken since autumn of 2024, has finally made its way to the desk of President Putin. More on that near the end of this report. Now, the footage itself is available to all my channel members, and since then, 2 additional video clips have come out, which I've also put in the brutal footage combat tier of the channel memberships. So let me do a quick shout out to the newest channel members, and with that, let's get into it. So the Ukrainian Reserve Major, Mr. Hetman, said in his interview with Ukrainian TV as follows. Regarding the fighting in Kurakhove, this means that the Russian enemy is advancing, trying to bypass Pokrovsk from the flanks in order to at least cut the Pokrovsk-Konstantinovka route to damage our logistics. In Kurakhove, fighting is still underway for the thermal power plant, which was built back in the Cold War, that is, it can be considered a fortress for maintaining defense. The town itself is completely destroyed, as the spokesman of the military grouping that is there have to say. Will Kurakhove be retaken in the near future? Definitely not, Mr. Hetman noted. According to him, the current task is not to retake settlements on the Eastern Front, but at least to hold the defense, and if retreat, then with battles on previously prepared positions, which is what he says is happening now. The enemy is not fast, but it is advancing every day, he said. Will we be able to hold Kurakhove, he asks. He then makes a bit of an inaccurate comparison with football. But now, 111 enemies are playing against our 11, so no matter how well we play, the enemy plays with a numerical advantage and not by the rules, he claims. Therefore, we need to mobilize, we need people who will hold weapons in their hands and repel the Russian enemy on the battlefield. With all the drones, tanks and missiles, victory can only be achieved by infantry, and other means help it to do this. To hold Kurakhove and launch a counterattack there, we need to mobilize people voluntarily, or through recruitment, or in another way, because without people, forces and means, we will not be able to hold it. These were the words of Alexei Hetman in an interview that was conducted on the 11th of January. Now, the head of the Ukrainian Reservists Council, Mr. Timochko, also had this to say on Ukrainian TV, in quotations. It is important for the Russians not only to capture Kurakhove, but also to take control of the Kurakhove reservoir and the Kurakhove thermal power plant, as well as to cut off the logistics of the Ukrainian armed forces in the Kurakhove direction. The Russian occupants, as he describes them, are trying to continue the military operation towards Constantinople, trying to cross the dam or take control of the territory in the area of Terny and Sukiyali and advance along the Vovcha riverbed. They are trying to block the road from Zaporizhia to Donetsk, which is one of the main roads for supplying weapons and military support to the Kurakhove and Vermivka directions, he said. According to Mr. Timochko, now the Russians have rotated their fresh forces to the Pokrovsk and Kurakhove directions, concentrating more than 150,000 personnel. These are the maximum forces they could deploy in these areas, including in Vermivka, he claims. They will try to cut off the logistics routes to Pokrovsk to cut the city from the supply of weapons to Ukrainian defense forces, to expand the bridgehead in the western part of the city, but they will not succeed in the eastern part. They may face difficulties because there are large areas in this direction. Expanding the offensive will not be an easy task, the soldier summarized. Now, despite the refusal of these Ukrainian officials to admit the fall of Kurakhove, most of the Ukrainian bloggers and mappers admit the city has fallen to the Russians. For instance, here's what a pro-Ukrainian frontline report had to say. On December 31st, the Russian armed forces captured the industrial zone in the west of Kurakhove, the last fortified area of the armed forces of Ukraine in the city. However, some units of the armed forces of Ukraine remained there thereafter. The coverage of Kurakhove from the south and north helped to do this, which made it difficult to supply the city. In addition, Ukrainian troops had to spend a lot of effort to stop the Russian armed forces in the south, at the border of the Sukiyali River, and on the north on the Vovcha River. Despite the fact that the units of the armed forces of Ukraine have withdrawn from Kurakhove, they are still under threat of encirclement west of the city. Russian troops continue to advance west along the banks of the Sukiyali and Vovcha rivers. The armed forces of Ukraine still control only one road, the Donetsk-Zaporizhia road, but the risk that it will be physically cut by the armed forces of the Russian Federation remains. Now, what I garner from these reports is that the Ukrainians refuse to admit the loss of Kurakhove, or refuse to pull all of their troops out of the remnants of the western outskirts of the city, because they think that is the only thing preventing the Russians from closing the pincer on the only road left that leads out of Kurakhove. Now, even Polish media reported similarly on this sector and speculated as to the Ukrainian refusal to admit defeat. In quotations, almost all of Kurakhove is occupied by the Russians, and by keeping several observation posts, there is a purely political task for Ukraine, writes one of the Ukrainian groups dealing with monitoring the situation on the front on the internet, as reported by this Polish article. I say politically because the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense did not admit to the loss of the town, despite the fact that the Marines defending it on January 2nd reported that most of the defenders had left it, which, it seems, the attacking Russians did not realize. The retreat was confirmed the next day by a Ukrainian military expert Konstantin Mashovets. Now lastly, one of the hottest topics last week was the insane hand-to-hand combat video between the Russian YAKUT soldier and the Ukrainian soldier on the front in the east. RT News now reports that President Putin has awarded the title Hero of Russia to the soldier who defeated a Ukrainian service member in a brutal knife fight, a body cam video of which went viral online. His name is Andrei Grigorev, and he was decorated for bravery and heroism in combat, according to the presidential decree published on Saturday. A corporal with the 39th Motorized Rifle Brigade, Grigorev overpowered a Ukrainian soldier during a battle near the village of Trudove in Russia's Donetsk People's Republic. And Trudove, my friends, is located in the forming pocket to the south of Kurakhove, near Ospenivka. Now before moving on to the Pokrovsk sector, let's talk a little bit about the words of the Kharkiv City Council and what he had to say, with much alarm, mind you, about the manpower situation for the Ukrainian armed forces. In quotations, right now the situation is extremely dangerous, and the absence of a straightforward conversation between the authorities and the public is a major issue. The government needs to be honest with people about what's going on. The Ukrainian people deserve that. If we don't face the facts and take responsibility for the future of our state, things will get much harder. The president needs to thoroughly analyze the situation and make it clear to the public that without their involvement, victory is impossible. Reserves need to be prepared. As General Zaluzny said, it takes 6 months to a year to properly train a soldier. These were the words of Mr. Artem Revchuk. The Ukrainian army has made significant progress since 2022, but the biggest challenge now is a lack of motivated personnel. Revchuk noted that in 2022, his circle consisted solely of volunteers. Today, the situation is critical. Over 100,000 people have left military units after being caught on the street and sent to the front without choice. According to him, such individuals are a burden to commanders. We need to communicate that joining the army doesn't mean guaranteed death. It's crucial to focus on motivating new soldiers. Losing contact with family and material things is a significant challenge. Frontline soldiers need better support, and motivational packages should be offered to those joining the army. Boosters, like those implemented in Russia, could be a good idea.
Fuck leg.
If you have proper conversations with military personnel and veterans, they will tell you what inspires people to mobilize. People need to be allowed to choose their unit and plan their future. Clear service terms are necessary so recruits do not feel like they are slaves forever, he emphasized. Currently, Ukrainians rely heavily on Western aid, but everyone must do their part, or even the current situation could collapse. Revchuk warned of the fine line between how the front is holding now and how it could look tomorrow. The war impacts everyone, especially men, with the choice being whether to serve in the Ukrainian army to defend their country, or as is seen in the occupied areas of Kherson and Zaporizhia region, end up being conscripted in the Russian army. Now further north, in the key logistical hub of Pokrovsk, Russian troops continue to use the advantage gained as a result of the 2024 offensives. The border between Pokrovsk and Kurakhove was almost uncovered by the defense of the armed forces of Ukraine. Now the armed forces of the Russian Federation on a broad front are advancing through this gap to the west. At the same time, Russian army units are trying to cover Pokrovsk from the southwest. This may be the beginning of an operation to capture the city. The armed forces of Ukraine tried to detain the enemy at the turn of the Salt River, but Russian troops managed to move to the north bank in several places. Ukrainian troops tried for several weeks to knock out the Russian armed forces from the bridgehead on Salina near the village of Shevchenko, but they were bypassed in other areas by Russian units, which also forced a small river. The advanced units of the Russian army are located 3 to 4 kilometers from the southern outskirts of Pokrovsk and 3 kilometers from the village of Udachny to the west of the city. Near Udachny is the largest coking coal mine in Ukraine. The axis of the offensive of the armed forces of the Russian Federation is directed precisely at that village. While the armed forces of Ukraine are trying to repel the offensive on Pokrovsk from the south, another group of the Russian armed forces has become active to the east of the city. After several months of calm, Russian troops went on the offensive near the village of Vozdivizhenka in the direction of the Pokrovsk-Konstantinovka road. Probably, in the future, this group will try to cover Pokrovsk and its satellite cities from the northeast. The exit of the Russian armed forces to the road between Pokrovsk and the city of Konstantinovka will make it difficult to defend the latter. From the south, Russian units completing the capture of the Toretsk agglomeration may soon approach Konstantinovka. At the beginning of the year, the Russian armed forces launched another stage of the offensive on the city of Sudzha from several directions. In terms of time, it coincided with the counterattacks of the armed forces of Ukraine. All this turned into multiple counterfights. In most cases, the battlefield was left to the Russian troops, but they probably could not fulfill all the tasks assigned to them. The main target of the Russian offensive was the village of Malaya Loknia, northwest of Sudzha. This is a key position in the Ukrainian defense. The grouping of the armed forces of Ukraine in Malaya Loknia hangs from the north over the flank of the Russian offensive, which has been going along the Kurakhove-Sudzha road for several months. Previously, it counterattacked the Russian armed forces from occupying the village of Novo-Ivanovka, and now it has advanced further in the direction of the Lebedevka-Verdylikovo line. One of the roads through Verdylikovo passes through which Ukrainian troops are supplied in the Kursk region. In December, the Russian armed forces attacked the direction of Malaya Loknia from the north, but the attacks were repelled. Now Russian troops are advancing from the west and east. In the west, they occupied the village of Kruglenkoye and reached the village of Nikolaivka on the outskirts of Malaya Loknia, but they were stopped by counterattacks of the armed forces of Ukraine. In the northeast, the Russian offensive coincided with the local counterattack of the armed forces of Ukraine in the direction of the Berdyn farm. The Ukrainian troops who advanced several kilometers a day suffered losses and retreated. The armed forces of the Russian Federation were able to occupy the neighboring village of Roskaye Breshnoye. Despite the fact that the offensive on Malaya Loknia is difficult, Russian troops, having eventually occupied Novo-Ivanovka, advanced further west to Leonidovo. However, they are still far from Verdylikovo and the western outskirts of Sudzha. But the Russian armed forces reached the southern outskirts of Sudzha, occupying part of the village of Makhnovka. They could not go further. The path was blocked by the defense of the armed forces of Ukraine on the Smerditsa River. Russian media, RIA Novosti, has reported on a disturbing practice that the Russian frontline soldiers have noticed about the Ukrainian armed forces in Kursk. Ukrainian servicemen did not try to evacuate the bodies of colleagues who died in the attack on the Berdyn farm in the Kursk region. The commander of one of the groups of the Special Forces Akhmat operating at this site as part of the North Group with the call sign AID told Russian media RIA Novosti. On Sunday, they undertook a mechanized strike near the village of Berdyn with access to Novostonitsky. From there, they wanted to go to Bolshoye Soldatskoye, told about how the failed attempt to break through by the Ukrainian enemy began. According to the commander, Russian fighters destroyed 2 columns of equipment that were going to the farm and 2 cars that tried to retreat. In quotations, the infantry remained in the landings, so at dawn, the Special Forces Akhmat, together with its allies, this is the 11th Airborne Brigade, began clearing the outskirts of the settlement and forest plantations. At the moment, the situation has completely stabilized. The Ukrainian enemy either surrendered or was eliminated. As a result, a couple of dozen units of transport the enemy battalion lost in manpower in this senseless attack. I don't know what they were counting on, Mr. Aid added. He stressed that Ukrainian soldiers did not even try to take away the bodies of their colleagues who died in the forest strips. They looted bodies, they assembled machine guns, other things. They don't take bodies. They don't have such a habit, the agency's interlocutor concluded.
Давай, не, я не говорю спешить. Его надо прикрыть, возьми автомат. Да отпуск потом будет, заебал. Берлин?